deflactor PC, que en este caso sí que se sitúa un poco más por debajo de ese nivel del 3%. Y hablando de niveles y de objetivos, ya saben ustedes que el objetivo que persigue la Reserva Federal, también el Banco Central Europeo, es el de que la inflación, el IPC, se sitúe en el nivel del 2%. Es verdad que ahora mismo pues ese IPC está más cerca del 3%, de hecho está en el 3%, que en ese objetivo que persigue el Banco Central de Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, cuando ayer le preguntaron a Jerome Powell sobre si existe la posibilidad, la idea de llevar a cabo una revisión de ese nivel del 2%, el presidente de la Reserva Federal volvía a insistir en que ese objetivo del 2% se sigue manteniendo y, de hecho, durante la rueda de prensa posterior a la última reunión de la FED, Jerome Powell dijo que no se podía poner sobre la mesa la idea de modificar ese objetivo del 2% en un momento en el que no se está consiguiendo, que ese tema se debatiría, pero primero hay que llegar a ese objetivo del 2% que ahora mismo se aleja en un punto porcentual. Vamos a ver sus palabras.
El objetivo del 2% de inflación se mantendrá y no tendrá ningún tipo de revisión. Nuestra revisión será más bien en cuanto a los eventos del Comité Federal, del Comité Federal del Mercado Abierto en todo el mundo. Tendremos en cuenta todas las lecciones que hemos aprendido durante los últimos años para así servir a los estadounidenses. Y esperamos tener otra revisión a finales de...
Otro de los asuntos que fue más repetido durante esa intervención ayer ante el Senado desde Estados Unidos por parte del presidente de la Reserva Federal es la independencia de la Reserva Federal respecto a esas presiones que está intentando ejercer el presidente de Estados Unidos sobre la Fed. Hoy ha vuelto a insistir en que la Reserva Federal tiene que bajar los tipos de interés. Le han preguntado sobre ese tema, lo hicieron ayer, probablemente lo harán hoy, y la respuesta del presidente de la Fed fue clara, cristalina y contundente.
Responsabilidades se comprometería a trabajar con este comité para supervisar y revisar los manuales de supervisión de la Reserva Federal como herramienta para poder frenar a cualquier injerencia política. Sí, me comprometo. Gracias, señor. La responsabilidad es muy importante.
Otro de los debates que sobre la mesa cada vez que se habla de la evolución de las políticas de tipos por parte de la Reserva Federal, cada vez que se van viendo los diferentes datos macro que se van publicando, es las dudas sobre que nos enfrentemos a un escenario de esta inflación, que las altas tasas de inflación afecten al crecimiento de la economía, y ayer dijo el presidente de la Reserva Federal que no hay riesgo de recesión. Ya empieza esa comparecencia de nuevo del presidente de la Fed ante la Cámara de Representantes de Estados Unidos. Hemos repasado las claves de su discurso ante el Senado. Ahora Powell se enfrenta a dos elementos que no teníamos en cuenta ayer. Uno, la inflación en Estados Unidos que repunta. Dos, la presión que está ejerciendo sobre las decisiones del Banco Central de Estados Unidos el presidente del gobierno, Donald Trump. Vamos con esa intervención.
The erosion of Americans' incomes and thereby their savings was caused by a combination of irresponsible fiscal policy, supply chain disruptions, but also by, in my view, the Federal Reserve fighting the last war, staying too low for too long. Chairman Powell, you and I have discussed that previous hearings of the Fed, like many others, assumed that the pre-pandemic era of low inflation and low interest rates would continue. This belief was one of the reasons the Fed changed its monetary policy framework in August 2020, only 7 months before inflation began its 4-decade steep march upward in March of 2021. In hindsight, the adoption of the so-called flexible average inflation targeting appears ill-timed and ill-fitted for a post-pandemic world. As the Fed undertakes a review of its monetary policy framework, you must account for the lessons of the last 4 years and think about what's ahead over the horizon, not what has been. The Fed has made progress on inflation, but as the last mile seems the hardest. As Bank of America economist Stephen Juneau said yesterday, inflation is stuck above target with risks to the upside. In August 2022, with inflation raging, you gave a speech that echoed some of your predecessors as chair. You vowed to keep at it till we're confident the job is done. It's a vow you should fulfill. With this morning's confirmation that inflation is well above the 2% target at 3% and making move upwards, other economic indicators are positive. As you reported yesterday, a low inflation rate, solid GDP growth, and financial conditions continue to support expansion and investment. This is not a time to say that there are no risks, but some perhaps unseen. However, these risks in comparison to the risks of a resurgence of inflation present are modest. Given the already high prices due to President Biden's inflation, Americans simply cannot afford further price increases at the grocery store and gas pump. Such a resurgence would likely force the Fed to begin another tightening cycle, making mortgages, credit cards, and small business loans unattainable for many. That's why I urge the Fed to forge ahead with its monetary policy duties until you're confident the mission is complete and price stability has been restored. The fact is, over the past decade, we've witnessed too many distracting additional mandates, diluting the Fed's core mission of price stability. This is the reason we formed the Task Force on Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity that will be led by Chair Frank Lucas. The task force purpose is to ensure that the monetary policy actions of the Fed are put under a magnifying glass and prioritized for this committee. And I look forward to our first hearing of the task force. I now want to turn to some of the other Fed responsibilities: bank regulation and supervision. The Fed was created by Congress to be an independent agency. The intent is to insulate the Federal Reserve's monetary policy from political influence. Unfortunately, in the last 2.5 years of the Biden administration, the Fed took on serious liberties with its independence in the areas of supervision. In law, Federal Vice Chair for Supervision is to develop policy recommendations that then are been brought to the Board of Governors for consideration. In my estimation, over the years, you and the board have been too deferential to the statutory Vice Chairman for Supervision. Vice Chair Barr turned the Basel III endgame rulemaking into a partisan attempt to propose a massive hike on capital on American banks, making them less competitive. The Fed has a chance right now to get back on the right track and preserve its independence for the long-term benefit of the American people. And with that, I yield back. Chair recognizes Mr. Lucas, the Chair of the Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While there are differences of approach in this room, a bipartisan guiding principle is that maximizing economic growth is the path to economic prosperity. It is the single greatest factor in delivering opportunity and improving the quality of life for the folks back home. The actions of the Federal Reserve and the machinery of monetary policy play an important role in economic stability. With the 5-year review of the monetary policy framework underway, I hope this will be an opportunity to evaluate the effectiveness of the Fed's toolkit and its vast influence on the lives of every American. The creation of the new monetary policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force will afford us the opportunity to dive deeper into this topic. Chairman Powell, thank you for being here. There are real issues that deserve our attention, and I hope today will be productive. I look forward to hearing your testimony on the state of the economy, where we're at, and where we're headed. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Vargas, the ranking member of the Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ranking member. And thank you, Chairman Powell, both for your years of public service and for appearing before our committee today. As a ranking member of the newly formed Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force, I look forward to working with Chairman Lucas and the rest of my colleagues to address these important issues. The research is clear. Independent central banks perform better in carrying out their mandates than politically motivated central banks. The independence of the Federal Reserve is crucial to achievement of this dual mandate goals to maintain both maximum employment and stable prices. And although this dual mandate has been criticized by some, it continues to serve Americans well. It has not prevented the Fed from making substantial progress on driving down inflation, all the while avoiding a recession, which many saw as inevitable. I look forward to your testimony, Chairman Powell, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'd like to turn to the gentleman from Michigan and yield to him for a point of personal privilege. Mr. Heisinger.
Thank you, Chairman Hill. And as we all know, all good things must come to an end. And I want to take a begin with her dedication to my team, this committee, her colleagues, and this institution are something that we all should aspire to achieve. And Nicole has effectively served in various roles, from a professional staff member right out of law school to now Deputy General Counsel in this particular Congress. And her time with the committee, Nicole has worked on or led investigations into Sam Bankman-Fried, the bank collapses of 2023, terrorist financing, culture and corruption at the FDIC, and the SEC's climate disclosure rule, just to name a few. And I've sat through her questioning, and it's fierce and tenacious and directed. Myself, my team, and frankly, the whole Financial Services Committee team can't thank Nicole enough for her work and what she has done on behalf of this organization. And like all good staffers, she has become a confidant, a sounding board, has the ability to say no in a very nice way, but in a very tough way as well. And although Nicole will be leaving the committee, her contributions will not be forgotten and are deeply cherished. So thank you, Nicole. We deeply appreciate all of your work, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, we welcome your testimony. Chairman Powell, you'll be recognized for 5 minutes to go to an oral presentation of your testimony. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Hill, Ranking Member Waters, and other members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to present the Federal Reserve's semi-annual monetary policy report. The Federal Reserve remains squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and price stability for the benefit of the American people. The economy is strong overall and has made significant progress toward our goals over the past 2 years. Labor market conditions have cooled from their formerly overheated state and remain solid. Inflation has moved much closer to our 2% longer run goal, though it remains somewhat elevated. We are attentive to the risks on both sides of our mandate. I will review the current economic situation before turning to monetary policy. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. GDP rose 2.5% in 2000.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask you to pull your mic a little closer, please? Thank you so much.
Sure. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. GDP rose 2.5% in 2024, bolstered by resilient consumer spending. Investment in equipment and intangibles appears to have declined in the fourth quarter, but was solid for the year overall. Following weakness in the middle of last year, activity in the housing sector seems to have stabilized. In the labor market, conditions remain solid and appear to have stabilized. Payroll job gains averaged 189,000 per month over the past 4 months. Following earlier increases, the unemployment rate has been steady since the middle of last year and at 4% in January remains low. Nominal wage growth has eased over the past year and the jobs to workers gap has narrowed. Overall, a wide set of indicators suggests that conditions in the labor market are broadly in balance. The labor market is not a source of significant inflationary pressures. The strong labor market conditions in recent years have helped narrow long-standing disparities in employment and earnings across demographic groups. Inflation has eased significantly over the past 2 years, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer run goal. Total PCE prices rose 2.6% over the 12 months ending in December, and excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.8%. Longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. Since last September, the FOMC lowered the policy rate by a full percentage point from its peak, after having maintained the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5% for 14 months. That recalibration of our policy stance was appropriate in light of progress on inflation and the cooling in the labor market. Meanwhile, we've continued to reduce our securities holdings. With our policy stance now significantly less restrictive than it had been and the economy remaining strong, we do not need to be in a hurry to adjust our policy stance. We know that reducing policy restraint too fast or too much could hinder progress on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too slowly or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering the extent and timing of additional adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the FOMC will assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. As the economy evolves, we will adjust our policy stance in a manner that best promotes our maximum employment and price stability goals. If the economy remains strong and inflation does not continue to move sustainably toward 2%, we can maintain policy restraint for longer. If the labor market were to weaken unexpectedly, or if inflation were to fall more quickly than anticipated, we can ease policy accordingly. We are attentive to the risks to both sides of our dual mandate, and policy is well positioned to deal with the risks and uncertainties that we face. This year, we're conducting our second periodic review of our monetary policy strategy, tools, and communications, the framework used to pursue our congressionally assigned goals. The focus of this review is on the FOMC's Statement on Longer Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategy, which articulates the committee's approach to monetary policy, and on the committee's policy communications tools. The committee's 2% longer run inflation goal will be retained and will not be a focus of the review. Our review will include outreach and public events involving a wide range of parties, including Fed Listens events around the country and a research conference in May. We will take on board the lessons of the last 5 years and adapt our approach where appropriate to best serve the American people to whom we are accountable. We intend to wrap up the review by late summer. Let me conclude by emphasizing that at the Fed, we'll do everything we can to achieve the dual mandate goals Congress set for monetary policy. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. Thank you, and I look forward to our questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman yields back. I want to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mrs. Waters from California, for a 4-minute opening statement.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, Chair Powell, to our country is on the precipice of an economic disaster unlike anything we've seen in recent memory. While Trump promised lower prices for working class families, we're seeing the exact opposite. In fact, grocery prices are rising. According to the Labor Department, eggs are up 40% more expensive than they were even a year ago. In my home state of California, we've seen eggs as high as $9 and more for a dozen. Inflation is rising, and it is up to 3% for the first time since June. And other staples are about to get more expensive as Trump levies new taxes on steel and aluminum. America's consumers and businesses are facing uncertainty and chaos. This is all because Trump and his unelected billionaire co-president Elon Musk are taking a sledgehammer to our economy and democracy. In recent days, they attempted to illegally kill the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the same agency created after the financial crisis of 2008. Since its inception, CFPB has successfully fought on behalf of working class families against abusive big banks and predatory lenders, and not to mention returned $21 billion back to families who were swindled. Chair Powell, you explained yesterday that with the CFPB shutdown, there is no agency to supervise big banks to ensure they follow consumer finance law. In the face of these illegal, cruel, and relentless attacks, Chair Hill, it is both urgent and critical that you immediately convene a long overdue hearing with CFPB Acting Director Vaught, members of Congress, and importantly, the American public deserves answers as to why Musk and his Doge minions are in possession of sensitive consumer information and what they are doing with it. Additionally, Trump is simultaneously threatening import taxes on U.S. companies that will increase the cost of groceries and other basic supplies for all. Trump is freezing funds for housing assistance and community development and whittling down the federal workforce so that his billionaire boys club can suck any of these workers' salaries into their own pockets. This is all part of Trump's Project 25 playbook. You know what else he's taken from Project 2025, Chair Powell? Their plan to eliminate the Fed. We're watching this play out as Trump doubles down on his efforts to gut the independence of the Fed. As we've seen with demands that you drop rates immediately. In fact, his co-president Musk attacked Fed independence in a tweet earlier this year. Chair Powell, I know you have been adamant about the independence of the Fed and have thus far resisted pressure from Trump. But after your decision to eliminate DEI initiatives following Trump's illegal order, I'm concerned that Trump has more influence over you than you let on. I speak for all of my colleagues on the Democratic side when I say that you must stand firm in defending the Fed's independence. Reject any attempt by Elon Musk and his Doge minions to gain access to the Fed, its systems and data, and speak forcefully about what's at stake for our economy. The American public must hear from you, our central bank, today.
Gentlewoman yields back. I yield myself 5 minutes for questions. Thank you again, Chairman Powell, for being with us. Let me start with the Fed's bank regulation and supervisory function. As I mentioned in my opening statement, over the past 2.5 years, the outgoing Vice Chair for Supervision has pushed new regulations that would move the United States towards a one-size-fits-all approach to prudential regulation that disregards the congressional mandate that's been quite clearly established for regulators to tailor bank regulation based on an institution's size, complexity, and risk profile. Earlier this year, the Fed board announced that Michael Barr would be stepping down from his position as vice chair on February 28th, 2025, or earlier, should a successor be confirmed. Significantly, the board also announced at that time that it does not intend to take up any major rulemakings until a vice chair for supervision successor is confirmed. I've discussed this with you. I've got concerns about that. You're not abdicating your supervisory response while we wait around for a vice chair for supervision. Do you agree that it's the Board of Governors that has the responsibility for bank supervision policy?
I do, and I would also agree that we need to carry on with our regulatory and supervisory duties. We can't take a holiday, and we will proceed with the things that we should be proceeding with.
You testified in the Senate yesterday, and know you enjoyed time with the senators, and you talked a little bit about Basel III Endgame. And again, in my opening statement, I talked about that the intent was to harmonize those rules, true for the largest institutions in the world, but also do that in a way that's capital neutral. And many of us here in Congress on both sides of the aisle felt like Vice Chairman Barr's approach was gold plating already high standards for American banks. You testified yesterday that you think bank capital levels are about right for those large institutions. Would you tell the committee today that it's your intent to repropose a Basel III endgame approach, just speaking on behalf of the Fed only, not the other supervisors, and that it be take into account the comments and that it be generally capital neutral?
We do intend to repropose Basel III Endgame, and we intend to do that just as soon as we can get together with the new leadership at the two other banking agencies. And as I mentioned, I think we can do that pretty promptly once those people are in place. I look forward to doing that. My long-held view, as I've said in many of these hearings, is that capital in the banking system for the largest banks is at about right. And that would be my starting point on going into these discussions. But I do want to defer. I do want to, leave it for my upcoming, new leadership at those agencies to have their own views on that.
I think that's important. I think it needs to be coordinated and harmonized among our supervisory agencies. And I do want you to take into account how Basel III Endgame proposal interacts with other pending rules, whether they're on liquidity or the other things like operating risk in the companies. I think that was a lot of the centrality of the comments that we saw on your bar proposal. Turning to monetary policy, looking back at 2020 and 2021, I was looking at all the principal monetary policy rules that you report in your semi-annual report. And had you followed any of the monetary policy rules that you track, they would have had you tighten sooner in the cycle rather than waiting. And I think that could have reflected, maybe not seen us have a 40-year high in inflation. Using the benefit of hindsight, do you think you should have looked at those rules more closely in the open market operations and tightened sooner?
I will say, and I've said before, that hindsight suggests that it would have been good if we had tightened earlier. I don't know how much difference that would have made, but I'd be very careful with those rules. Those rules, those rules in the middle of last year suggested that our policy rate was a couple hundred basis points too high. You know, so we need to. They're a starting point, not an ending point.
Right. But we've had this conversation before. The point is that they do offer a roadmap, and you do mention them in writing in your monetary policy reports, except for one time during the pandemic. And I think, though, that you're adding that to your reference point and your forward guidance and in your communications, I think would be important. Can you tell us about the review of the inflation targeting and when you expect to complete that?
Expect to complete it by the late in the summer this year. We're just beginning it now, and we're going to look at all the decisions that we made, why we made them back in 2020. We're going to ask ourselves what's changed. We're going to be open to criticism and good ways of thinking about it, and I think we'll make appropriate, discrete adjustments.
I thank you for being with us today, and I turn to the ranking member of the full committee, Mrs. Waters, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It is no secret that President Trump, that he wants to do away with the Federal Reserve altogether. He said he knows interest rates much better than you do. I want you to know that some of us here have been fighting to make sure that everybody understands the importance of the central bank. Every country dealing with crypto, their central bank is involved. But of course, Trump and the opposite side of the aisle fought us. And that's one of the reasons we were not able to come together with a bipartisan agreement on stablecoins. You previously said that you would not resign if Trump asked you to do that. Do you stand by that commitment?
I have no changes to that.
I can't hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. Please let the record record that adequately. I appreciate that because you have a right to your position not to be interfered with by law, I believe, or even Constitution. When Musk comes knocking at the Fed's door, you gonna let him in?
I don't have anything for you on that.
Would you like to tell us today that you won't let Doge into the Federal Reserve or have access to the systems and the data?
So I don't have any, we've had no contact, and I don't really have, I have nothing for you to report today on that.
Well, you know what happened at Treasury, and you know what happened over at the CFPB, and the people of this country are being violated because all of our privacy is being taken up by Elon Musk and Trump, and we don't know what all they have on us, our bank accounts, everything that in our lives. So I want to protect it in the Fed. Mr. Powell, the last time you testified before this committee, you said, and I quote, "Really successful institutions in the United States generally are those that do a really good job on diversity and get the best out of people and attract a broad, diverse range of talents to the table. That is the way we feel about it. And at the Fed, and that is what we've been doing and will continue to do." Chair Powell, how will you ensure that the Fed continues to attract the best and most diverse employees?
We're institutions like ours, private and public, are in a constant contest to hire the best talent in the country. And we've all learned, I think, and certainly we have, that we will go anywhere to find that talent, and including places that we didn't go 25 years ago. And we'll just continue to do that. You know, we're recruiting, as you know, at many, many, many universities and colleges, including historically Black universities and colleges, and others. And that's what we find, and that's our practice. We think that's the best way to go about it.
Thank you very much. And that's what I've always felt about the Fed. No matter what they call it, you only attracted and hired the best qualified people in your operation, no matter what they refer to it as, what they call it, whatever way they define it. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Chair Powell, are you willing to provide my staff with an immediate briefing from your agency on the status of your OMWEs and equal employment offices?
Yes.
Thank you. I believe that you know that the OMWEs were created with the Dodd-Frank reforms. It's in law. And as I understand it, any attempt to dismantle OMWEs would have to come before the Congress of the United States of America. Is that your understanding?
Well, yes, Section 342 of Dodd-Frank, which is the OMWE section, is the law.
Thank you. Chair Powell, to what extent have you consulted with other board members in determining how your agency is complying with Section 342 of Dodd-Frank, and as well as any other federal anti-discrimination law?
I think we've consulted with senior staff and board members quite a bit.
Chair Powell, days after his inauguration, President Trump issued an executive order on digital assets, which includes a prohibition on central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. The executive order banned any, quote, form of digital money or monetary value denominated in the national unit of account that is a direct liability of central bank, end quote. I'm concerned that this extremely broad definition could go far beyond CBDCs. Well, thank you very much. My time is up, but I appreciate your presence here today, and I appreciate your willingness to stand up for your right.
Gentlewoman's
to be the
time
chair.
has expired,
And
but
I now yield back. Thank you.
But I do invite the chairman to respond to the gentlewoman's question on CBDCs in writing. And now we turn to the vice chair of the floor.
Comparecencia en directo del presidente de la Reserva Federal ante la Cámara de Representantes de Estados Unidos, repitiendo lo que dijo en la sesión de ayer ante el Senado, insistiendo en su independencia frente al gobierno de Donald Trump, y también hablando de que ahora mismo inflación y mercado laboral se mantienen en una situación de equilibrio, por lo tanto dice que no hay prisa por bajar los tipos de interés. Y vamos a seguir hablando de economía, de dinero, con una última hora que nos mantiene en Estados Unidos, porque el Comité de Presupuestos de la Cámara de Representantes de Estados Unidos ha emitido un plan fiscal para el presupuesto del Congreso para el año fiscal 2025 que aumenta el límite de deuda legal del país en $4 billones. Además de ese aumento del techo de deuda en $4 billones, el Comité de Medios y Arbitrios de la Cámara de Representantes de Estados Unidos también habla de un recorte de impuestos por valor de $4,5 billones, mientras que el gasto obligatorio se reduciría en $2 billones durante esa ventana presupuestaria. Así que techo de gasto que aumentaría en $4 billones. Además, les contamos que se propone un recorte de impuestos de $4,5 billones en los próximos 10 años y también recortes de $2 billones al gasto obligatorio a lo largo de esa misma ventana, a lo largo de esa década. Esa es la última hora y continuamos con esa intervención de Jerome Powell ante la Cámara de Representantes de Estados Unidos.
However, I believe your dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices should remain the ultimate objective. I assume you agree with that. Let the record reflect slight head nod on that, I guess. This committee is going to be very focused on monetary policy, and with my good friend from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, chairing a task force that I'm happy to be a part of, We're going to be addressing some of those issues. Chair Hill touched on some of the rules that have been discussed. I, for one, have always been particular to Taylor rule, but there's a number of rules. I know you go through those. At one point, I suggested that we could call it the Yellen rule with Chair Yellen. But there needed to be some sort of public declaration of what to benchmark against, and I still feel that that is of some importance. You outlined your timeline on this particular review, but I'm curious, do you believe that the last policy framework limited the Fed's response to raising inflation, something that you and I have talked about over the years?
No, I'll tell you why we didn't raise rates. We thought the inflation was transitory. I can show you forecasts from the end of 2021 by us, by staff, by the blue chip. Everybody thought it was going to be transitory. That's why we didn't raise rates.
And I also distinctly remember a hearing where you and Secretary Yellen at the time were sitting next to each other, and it looked like you visibly scooted away when I asked you both whether it was still transitory, and you had, for the first time ever, a separate answer. Her answer was yes, it still was transitory. You gave a very Fed speak answer of, we no longer believe the data shows that. So no. And to kind of go to Chair Hill's point, we think that might have been a little late on that. On back to the review, I'm curious, what sort of input are you looking for from the public and from Congress as you go into that review?
So from the public, we'll do a series of Fed Listens events, which were very successful the last time. And it involves us sitting down and meeting with people, some of whom know a lot about what the Fed does, some of whom just tell you what's going on in their communities. It was really, it was a very successful part of our outreach last time. In terms of Congress, we'll keep you informed of our progress. We welcome anything you may offer. But it's a public, we're open to the public on this. It's a public review as distinct from what we were doing before. And so we're welcoming views from all over.
And not to get ahead of the chairman, but I look forward to us having more conversations about that with the working group. I want to switch topics and focus a bit back to the bank supervision. Michael Barr has stepped down from his position as vice chair for supervision effective at the end of the month. And whether, frankly, President Trump fills that position is entirely up to him. But in the absence of a vice chair for supervision, you're still working, I think, on it. I think your quote to the chairman was, there's no time for a holiday. Now, this vice chair of supervision is a Fed governor that has, frankly, extraordinary powers and responsibilities. And ultimately, my question to you is, does the Fed really need a separate vice chair to complete its work? Now, I got here after the 2010 election, 2011, shortly after Dodd-Frank was passed. I know this vice chair position was created by Dodd-Frank. I've just been dealing with the echo effects now for the last going on 15 years of Dodd-Frank. Do we really need to have a separate vice chair of supervision?
So for many years, as you know, we did our business without a vice chair for supervision. What that means is everything goes through the full board.
And it was effective?
I think it was, and also there was less volatility.
Explain that. Why was there less volatility?
Well, because you've got a group of 7 people on the board, and there will be some as appointments change. There'll be some changes in the approach to regulation, but putting it all in a single person, admittedly just to recommend to the board, can lead to sort of some volatility in these things, which is really
larger swings in policy.
Larger swings in the kind of things, and that's not great for the institutions that we want to regulate. We want to have a good set of regulation that doesn't swing back and forth very much. The question of whether it's a good thing to have in the law is really one for you. But I will tell you, we will once Vice Chair Barr completes his term in a few weeks, we will continue on until there's a new vice chair for supervision, and we can very much get our work done.
Or if there is one. So with that, Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
I thank the Vice Chairman. Mr. Heisger yields back. Recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 5 minutes of questions.
Chairman Powell, you are the only bipartisan person or thing left in Washington. You were appointed by Obama. Trump gave you a promotion. Biden reappointed you. And you are the only Biden appointee not to hear the words, "you're fired," from our president. So I hope we listen to what you have to say, because you're the only person that I can identify in Washington that has support on both sides of the aisle. Mr. Huizenga mentions the importance of your dual mandate. Project 2025 calls for abolishing the dual mandate and eliminating a mandate that you focus on employment. If we were to give you just one mandate dealing with price stability and take away the mandate on employment, over the next 10 years, would our GDP be higher or lower?
It wouldn't be possible for me to say.
Does the fact that you focus on employment as one of your dual mandates lead to lower unemployment, higher employment in our country?
It may do so. We do balance those things.
Thank
To some extent, that may be right.
Chair Hill spoke about how important it is that you maintain your independence. I noticed that in light of the hiring freeze, the Fed has removed all its job postings. I'm hoping that your personnel policy will be as independent as everything else at the Fed. But I'm more concerned with the president's statement at 7:58 this morning, where he said interest rates should be lowered. He said it. Will that influence what the Fed actually does?
I, as a practice, never comment on anything the president says, but I think people can be confident that we'll continue to keep our heads down, do our work, make our decisions based on what's happening in the economy, the outlook,
And
the balance of
statements
risks.
by elected
No
officials
change.
are not among the things that cause you to act one way or the other.
That's correct.
Thank you. And he went on to say, he said interest rates should be lowered, something which would go hand in hand with upcoming tariffs. Let's rock and roll America. I certainly agree with the rock and roll America, but the Peterson Institute says that the policies that the president ran on will raise the CPI by between 4 and 7.5 points. And I think the biggest element of that is the proposed tariffs. If we have higher tariffs across the board, say 10 to 25%, would that increase the cost of living? And would an increase in the CPI or related indexes of the cost of living lead to higher interest rates?
You know, there are many organizations, public and private, whose role is to speculate publicly about what this might be. What we're doing is we're reserving judgment until we actually know what the policies are.
But if we have a higher cost of living, does that lead to higher interest rates? The CPI goes up, or CPE, excuse me.
Well, if inflation goes up in general,
Yeah.
forget about tariffs. In general, of course, we will use our tools, which is the interest rate, to bring it back down to 2% over time.
Okay. Yesterday, you told the Senate we're going to release the stress test scenarios before we implement them. Will you take a holistic look at large bank capital requirements, including the risk-based capital ratios like Basel III Endgame, stress testing, to make sure that you don't have a contraction in the ability of credit to Main Street businesses?
Yes.
Great. There's a proposal in Project 2025 that we abolish Fannie and Freddie. If there was no explicit or implicit federal guarantee for those who invest in mortgages, would that lead to higher mortgage interest rates?
Since you'd no longer be borrowing on the credit of the United States, in other words, so Fannie and Freddie would be privately funded, it could lead to that. I think privatizing Freddie and Fannie might have other virtues too, though, as has been considered many times by this committee and others.
Might have some virtues, but it would lead to higher mortgage rates.
It could.
The CFPB has been put on ice, but all the regulations remain in force. So if you're a bank that wants to comply with those regulations, there's nobody that can give you any clarification. So you don't know. And if you're a bank that doesn't want to comply, the next presidential election may put into practice a CFPB that enforces all the regulations that the Trump administration has tried to eliminate. Does that cause confusion for banks?
You're speculating about what the situation might be. I would say that it could. Yeah.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Chair Powell, let's talk about the balance sheet. As we've discussed several times before, the consistent and massive growth of the federal debt creates long-run challenges for both the United States and saddles future generations with an onerous burden. But it also creates a challenging environment for the markets as the Treasury market expands in kind. As the Fed engages in quantitative tightening, allowing the Treasuries to roll off, the Fed is careful to ensure that there are ample reserves for the balance sheet. Could you briefly discuss the conditions that determine the ideal level of reserves?
Sure. So let me say that we intend to slow, and we have slowed, but then stop the process of shrinking our balance sheet at a time when we think that reserves are somewhat above the level that we judge to be consistent with our ample reserves framework. So what that means is we want reserves to be ample, meaning we don't want them to suddenly appear to be shortages of reserves. So we're going to think of where those shortages might appear, and we're going to put a buffer on top of that, because nothing good happens when there's not enough liquidity. So that's our overall framework. And right now we feel like all the evidence suggests that reserves are still abundant, which is more than ample.
As you know, in early 2021, the Fed stated that it would invite comments on the supplemental leverage ratio. That has not happened yet. I've made the point that the growth of the U.S. Treasury market paired with a decreased willingness of banks to act as intermediaries is a major issue on the horizon. When former Treasury Secretary Yellen was before this committee last year, I asked her about the resiliency of the Treasury market, specifically about the wisdom of permanently modifying the SLR. She said it's something that the banking regulator should consider. Does the Fed plan to finally look at the SLR?
Yes, I believe we will. I have, for a long time, like others, been somewhat concerned about the levels of liquidity in the Treasury market. The amount of Treasuries has grown much faster than the intermediation capacity has grown. And one obvious thing to do is to reduce the effective supplemental leverage ratio, the bindingness of it. So that's something I do expect we will return to and work on with our new colleagues at the other agencies and get done.
Because I think my colleagues are aware that over the course of recent times, literally we have 8 times as much debt to process, but only half as many major market makers. The Federal Reserve is not immune to politics. You, like every Fed governor, go through a lengthy confirmation process in the Senate. And of course, you're required to answer to Congress in hearings like this. I can trace a major political turning point at the Fed to the passage of Dodd-Frank, which greatly expanded the Fed's regulation and supervision authority. Chairman Powell, do you worry that the independence of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy function is in any way hindered by its role as a bank regulator? Can you do both?
Well, we can and we do, and we'll continue to do that. Clearly, the regulatory and supervisory side is more contentious in political circles. But we will continue to carry it out as best we can, and to do so in a non-political way as best we can.
And clearly that'll be a major discussion topic in the task force. In my remaining time, could you discuss the Fed's 5-year review of monetary policy? What are the categories of issues you think that will be helpful to receive feedback on?
So a good part of it will be looking at the changes we made in 2020, which were made in an environment where we had been stuck at the effective lower bound at 0 for 7 years. And the highest we got our rate really was sustainably was 1.5%. And that was the highest of any advanced economy central bank. So the concern was that at the slightest downturn, we'd be back at the 0 lower bound and we'd be stuck. So we were looking for ways to make up for that. So then the question is, we got this inflation out of the pandemic and the events related to it. Are we in a different place now? And I think the chances are pretty good that maybe the effective lower bound is still a concern, but it's not the base case anymore. So we need to look at that and decide how what are the implications of that for our framework.
Thank you, Chairman, and I look forward to several more discussions on these topics. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Powell, thank you for being here today and you've indicated in past hearings that geopolitical tensions pose important risks to global economic activity. Back around this time last year when you appeared before the committee, you and I discussed how conflicts around the world, specifically the war in Ukraine, had impacted the cost of things like groceries in the United States of America. At that time, you indicated that the war had caused commodity prices to move sharply back home. Does that sound correct to you, if unfamiliar to you?
Yes, it does.
So just to reiterate, in this interconnected world that we live in, would it be safe to say that economic instability in other countries has the potential to impact economic factors here in the United States?
Sometimes, yes.
And so, given that fact, would it seem like a smart move for the United States government to remove one of our most effective strategic tools that, by mandate, assist U.S. commercial interests by supporting developing countries' economic growth and building countries' capacity to participate in the world trade? Would you agree with that?
It's not for me to be the judge or to say on that.
Well, we do know that a number of, like USAID, they buy a lot of their agricultural products, et cetera, from American farmers. And in fact, it helps the US economy when you look at the volume of agricultural products that are being bought so that we can continue to be a part of the rest of the world. Would that be correct?
As far as I know, yes.
So, today we find ourselves facing a situation where the president and his Dodge buddy Elon Musk seem hell-bent on dismantling USAID, no matter the consequences, even if they are dire. To me, the assault on this congressionally authorized body represents an attack on the rule of law and should outrage every member of this body. Every member, Democrats and Republicans alike. And I know that your interest is squarely within your dual mandate and not foreign policy. I sit on both committees. I'm here, but I'm also the ranking member on the Foreign Policy Committee. And so I can't sit here today and pretend that what we're doing won't impact employment and economic stability right here in the United States of America. Weakening USAID will fuel global crises, endanger American security, embolden other nations like China and Russia, and leave us here in the Trump administration solely responsible for the fallout. So I have to take this opportunity to urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to also stand up for USAID. Anytime we travel, we go visit what they do. We go visit the good that they do. We go visit what and how their economies improve so that they can be part of the global economy. So, if not because people just care about the rest of the world, then because we care about our country and recognize that instability elsewhere threatens our stability right here. It is extremely important in an interconnected world because the economy is interconnected around the world. We cannot isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Chairman Powell, welcome. We're delighted to be here, and I hope that this comes with greetings from every single member that we appreciate and respect you taking the time, even though you're expected here. We think you show up, and we admire you. Mr. Chairman, you and I both know that way back when, and we assume 21, that there was a decision made by the Fed that gets close to quantitative easing and then the term tapering. And we know that it was sold as a monetary stimulus to help the country, and I get that. There was about, in my opinion, $2.33 trillion that were taken out in loans. And Chairman just spoke a minute ago about the term debt versus growth. Debt versus growth, about this amount of money that sits out there on the debt side. Could you please take a minute and discuss this issue and how we should be looking at it? Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Sessions, are we talking about asset purchases that we made during the?
We are. We're
Okay.
talking about when the Fed went and sold
QE.
treasuries.
No, we bought treasuries.
Bought treasuries.
Yeah, we bought treasuries. So, it was a situation, I'll tell you why we did it. We were just out of the worst part of the pandemic, and we didn't know frankly, how good things were going to be, how strong the economy. We were very concerned. COVID is still raging, and it actually, had a very strong wave right into 22. But we wanted to we didn't want to stop buying treasuries too soon, because that has a stimulative effect on the economy, because we didn't want to provoke an unwanted tightening in financial conditions at a time when we thought the economy was still vulnerable. You look back in hindsight, we probably could have done that earlier and halted purchase earlier. In any case, we turned right around and started shrinking the balance sheet, and
You moved it from about 120 a month to 110.
But we're down now. We've been tapering for 2 years now, and we're down
That's
more
correct.
than $2 trillion. So, and we're still going. So that's why we did what we did.
Tell me what that looks like in the longer term aggregate versus with what the chairman said, debt versus growth. Because we believe the debt remains and the growth is not equaling that
So-
ability to pay it back.
So what happens is we borrow money to cover the spending that Congress has done. Our purchases don't affect that. We're basically issuing reserves, which is cash, and we're retiring Treasury securities. And the effect of that is to drive down long-term rates. That's the whole reason for QE.
And what are you paying for those long-term rates?
Market rates. We're paying exactly the market.
And what would that market be approximately a year ago or to now?
Well, the 10-year, we're not, of course, we're going in the other direction now. We're shrinking now, but
We
were
are.
buying, the 10-year was yielding a very, very low yield on it. Was quite low during the pandemic, extremely low, because, growth was slow. There was a lot of demand for treasuries. So we were pushing down rates to support economic activity. When you can't lower your policy rate anymore and you want to do more stimulus, that's really the main thing you can do. It's actually the forefather of that was Milton Friedman, who came up with that thought way back in the past. But that's what we did. And then, as I mentioned, we turned around as soon as we lifted off and started raising rates. We immediately started shrinking the balance sheet, and we've shrunk it a lot, $2 trillion and still counting.
You have shrunk it $2 trillion?
Yes, we have.
Okay. And what do you believe remains, and you believe you're now stable for moving forward?
So I think we have a ways to go. Actually, the level of reserves, which is the thing we're focused on, hasn't really changed. All of that has come out of what's called the overnight reverse repo facility. I'd be happy to spend some time with you on this. This stuff is very complicated. And
Yes, I've
technical.
tried to find new data on it, and the last I found really was a CRS report of 22. So
It's
what's
very,
called
very big changes since then.
127.22. And
Yeah.
so the changes that you speak of are important.
Yeah.
And so I would appreciate that time.
Be happy to do
Yes.
that.
Great. I want to thank you for being here. The confidence that the American people have that we will turn not just the economics of their lives, but of the country is very important. And I today spoke about the country. And I want to thank you for your service and time. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and welcome, Chair Powell. Chair Powell, I'm worried about these tariffs. And I want you to kind of share with us your thoughts on these tariffs. I'm worried about, I think the president is wrong here. Tariffs can cause a terrible situation to the economy. I'm concerned about the inflationary impact on tariffs. And where cost increases from the tariffs, there's a cost to these tariffs. And we need not move into this area blindly. And some of these costs will be absorbed by business companies, but there are other costs that will be borne by the American consumers. We don't even understand this. And yet you have the president just using these tariffs as a means of fight or like a war. And this is going to do it. Everybody is not going to be Mexico or Canada. And while we got a little time, I want your thoughts on the dangers of these tariffs. The stock market is anticipating rate cuts. What will these tariffs do about that? Does the Fed see financial market stability as a factor in its decision-making process when considering the rate cuts? And here is specifically what I want you to get to. In light of the president, and politely I will say, his ill-crafted tariff strategy, do you foresee future rate cuts as a result of inflationary issues or due to a weaker labor market? And what do you consider to be promising inflation data? That's our big fight. And these tariffs are going to just add to inflation like a rocket ship. Your thoughts?
So,
And share with us, give us your opinion of the danger of these. There's a cost here. Tell us what you think about this.
the president has certain authorities over tariffs. Congress has authorities over tariffs. The Commerce Department is involved in some ways, but the Fed has no role in setting tariffs. And we don't comment on decisions made by those who do have that authority. We try to stick to our own knitting. In this particular case, it's possible that the economy would evolve in ways that, because of tariffs or partly because of tariffs, that we would need to do something with our policy rate, but we can't know what that is until we actually know what policies are enacted. And remember, it's not just tariffs. There are significant changes to immigration policy, fiscal policy, and also regulatory policy. You put all four of those, and all four of those were things that the president was elected to do. We will then try to make an intelligent judgment about the overall effect on the economy of those, and conduct our policy accordingly. But it's not our role in any way to comment on the wisdom of the policies that are enacted by Congress or by the administration.
Will he have an effect on whether or not you will resume your plan to cut the interest rates this year or continue to hold?
So we'll make our decisions as we go about what to do with interest rates based on the data that we see, the outlook, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. And we'll be considering all of those things. We won't be focusing on any particular policy, and I can't tell you what we'll be doing, because it will really depend. It's fairly uncertain environment right now.
Yeah.
The underlying economy is very strong, but there's some uncertainty out there about new policies. We're just going to have to wait and see what the effects of those policies are before we think about what we can do.
Well, all I
Should do.
want to say, God bless you. I know your strength. We've worked together over the years on many things, and this nation is grateful that we have you, your wisdom and intellect at this time.
I agree,
So
but the
that-
gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman, you're back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Wagner.
I thank the chair, and it's good to see you again, Chairman Powell. Chair Powell, under the Biden administration, American families were hit with a huge stealth tax from, as we've spoken about, inflation that drove up grocery prices and led to high rates on things like mortgages and car loans. Since 2021, the average Missouri household is paying about $1,100 more per month due to inflation. To put that number into perspective, the median family income in Missouri is $69,000. These families have had to spend $13,000 more of their annual income on the exact same goods. What specifically is the Federal Reserve's plan for making life easier for everyday Americans?
So the best thing we can do for Americans is to vigorously pursue both stable prices and maximum employment. We're trying to get back to a long expansion where prices are stable around 2%.
You seem to be there on labor, as you've pointed out. So tell me what else?
Sorry?
You seem to be there on labor. So what else?
I would say we're close, but not there on inflation. And you did see today's inflation print, which says the same thing. I mean, we've made great progress toward 2%. Last year, inflation was 2.6%. So great progress, but we're not quite there yet. So we want to keep policy restrictive for now so that we can see.
We're definitely not there for 30-year mortgages, upwards of 7%, Chair Powell. So let me switch topics. I continue to believe that as we've spoken about, and as was brought up prior colleagues here, that the federal banking agencies, including the Federal Reserve, should scrap the flawed Basel III endgame proposal and start over. You talked a little bit about how you plan to perhaps do that, and a timeline potentially. But how will the public, Chair Powell, be able to provide comments on any revised proposal as required by the Administrative Procedures Act?
So I fully expect, and I think it's a good idea for the United States to finish Basel III in a way that's, in keeping with Basel and also with what other jurisdictions are doing, comparable jurisdictions.
The key there is end game. This has been going on for 2 decades.
Where's the end already, right? So, we'll put all of that out for comment again and welcome the comments for all commenters.
I should make sure we're following the Administrative Procedure Act.
Oh, yes.
As you move forward.
We will.
Chair Powell, I understand you are interested in making the stress test scenarios that assess how a bank will perform through a crisis more transparent. As things stand now, while the Fed may make some information public, it doesn't show its math, which makes it difficult to assess the robustness and analytical rigor of the stress tests. Recently, the Federal Reserve announced that due to the, quote, evolving legal landscape, it would begin to take public comment on its stress test models and annual scenarios. Can you describe the changes in the legal landscape that have caused the Federal Reserve to suddenly seek public comment on its stress test regime and why it did not seek public comment from the beginning?
So we're an agency that's strongly committed to following the law as written by Congress and as interpreted by the Supreme Court. In the past few years, we've seen a string of administrative law cases from the Supreme Court, which are dealing with different issues, but there's a common theme, and that is significantly less deference to the views of agencies as compared to those of courts. Also just a raised expectations for compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act, we take that very much to heart. And this is one of the things that we're doing because of that. And we feel the
You
appropriate.
can look at things like Chevron deference. You can look at the EPA ruling by the courts, and they're returning the power back to the people and the Congress, not the administrative state, not those agencies and rulemakers.
So because of those things, we are putting, as you went through it, we're putting the models and everything else out for comment and taking similar steps.
Well, I'm glad to see that. I understand the Fed intends to complete a comprehensive review of its monetary policy strategy, tools, and communications practices. You mentioned that. What is the timeline?
We expect to complete our work and announce the results by the end of the summer.
End of the summer. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Chair Powell. Good to see you. Thank you for your good work. Chairman Powell, the Senate just filed a bill called the Genius Act. I'm always worried about anything that comes over from the Senate with the title genius in it. But it is an attempt to provide a regulatory framework for cryptocurrency. And in that proposal, which is similar in some respects to the House proposal, it would allow individual states to oversee issuers, and there would be no central federal authority. The idea is to disperse the responsibility from state to state. My concern, my overriding concern, is that with that spread of an expansion of crypto, and the president is 100% behind it. He just started his own meme coin. He's making a lot of money off of that, which is another issue. My concern is that the spread of an expansion of crypto will infect the traditional banking system because it's a volatile, speculative asset, and we've seen some very sudden disasters with crypto. I'm just wondering, are there any backstops that we can use, any firewalls that we can put in place that might insulate the traditional banking system, because they have access to the discount window and they're FDIC insured. So there may be, second order impacts if we have a collapse of a major crypto issuer. Are there any extra things that we can do to protect the traditional banking system?
Yes. So first, I would say there are really two things that are happening. One is banks are serving crypto customers, and we don't want to get in the way of banks serving perfectly legal customers as long as they understand the risks and that sort of thing. We don't want to single out any particular.
Are you speaking to custody?
Well, custody is more, the second thing is
Right.
undertaking activities
Okay.
on their own, right? And in that case, I do think it's appropriate to as usual, as bank supervisors, make sure that we understand and banks understand the risks that are involved in the activity that they're taking inside an insured depository. On the other hand, you don't want to go too far. I think there were a bunch of disasters, as we all remember, and we don't want to, and we were reacting to some extent to those. You don't want to go so far as to overplay your hand on that. So I think we need to be mindful that many of these activities can very well be done inside of banks, and custody may well be one of them. In fact, in Fed-regulated banks, there are lots of crypto activities happening now. They've just happened under a framework where we made sure that the bank understood and we understood exactly what they're doing.
Right. We also have the example of, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, First Republic Bank. One of the triggering events there. I mean, obviously the risk management was very poor in that respect, and they got on the wrong side of interest rates. But there were also some failures of issuers who had huge deposits at Silicon Valley, I believe, or Signature, or maybe both of them, and the suddenness of their collapse caused a run for the exits, and luckily with the scramble, we were able to sort of save that situation, so it didn't create a greater contagion. But are there steps that we can take that might strengthen our ability to respond to that type of collapse as well?
Yes, so in the wake of Silicon Valley Bank, we did work with many medium and sized banks that had any of the characteristics that we saw. And you mentioned, a long position in long-term securities that was underwater, along with a very unstable deposit base made up mostly of uninsured deposits. And in the case of Silicon Valley Bank, it was a lot of similar private equity and venture capital and hedge fund companies where they all just pulled their money out at the same time. So it was a bank run, and bank runs are very destructive whenever they happen. So we looked for that pattern. We worked with companies who had any aspect of that pattern, and we were successful, I think, in not having that crisis spread very broadly, and that was a good thing. Looking forward, though, we need to not forget that lesson and make sure that funding bases are stable and that we're focused on the basics of banking, which is credit risk, interest rate risk, liquidity risk.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, for 5 minutes.
Chairman Powell, let me ask you a quick monetary policy question and then turn to bank regulation and treasury market structure. I know hindsight is 20/20, but it's important to learn from mistakes, as you know, and you've conceded that the Fed miscalculated on inflation and mischaracterized inflation as transitory in 2021, 2022 time period. Given that inflation remains stuck above the Fed's 2% target, will you commit to scrapping the flexible average inflation targeting framework? And if not, why wouldn't you commit to returning just to a simple 2% target?
5:21 de la tarde, hora peninsular. Estamos siguiendo en este momento a Jerome Powell, segundo día que está ante el Senado respondiendo a una serie de preguntas. Ahora está diciendo, por ejemplo, que en retrospectiva probablemente podríamos haber detenido un poco esa flexibilización cuantitativa antes. También creo que todavía tenemos mucho camino por recorrer en la reducción del balance. Decía Powell, es posible que la Fed tenga que mover la tasa de política sobre los aranceles, pero también decía que estamos un poco a la espera, a ver cómo se desarrollan esos aranceles. También que estamos cerca, pero no llegamos al punto en materia de inflación. El dato de inflación de hoy lo indica. Estaremos ahora muy pendientes, pero el secretario del Tesoro estadounidense, Scott Bessent, está visitando Ucrania para conversar sobre energía, sobre minerales y sobre tierras raras. Se reúne también con el presidente ucraniano, con Volodymyr Zelensky. Los dos están manteniendo una reunión informativa conjunta. Vamos a conectar en este momento en directo con ellos.
Як справа?
Напружено.
Напружено?
А у вас? А у вас?
Так само. Sorry? Окей. Є. Ну, випустили 10 ракет сьогодні по 6 ракетам і по балістичним ракетам 10 патріотів.
А на честь чого ця атака?
30 мільйонів. Це 30 мільйонів. Безумовно, на жаль, є втрати. Але ще це нам виходить дуже дорого. Що ви запитали?
На честь чого ця атака?
Secretary. Hi, good to see you. Welcome, President Reagan. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for your visit. Okay. Good. Just like yeah. Oh, this side. Thank you so much. We have some first remarks?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary. You're very welcome. First of all, best regards to the President Trump from me, from our people. We are very thankful to you, your country, and your people, bipartisan support. We are very thankful for the support Ukraine from the very beginning. Of course, there is and I'm thankful to the president, to his message that he will support Ukraine and he really wants to stop this war. And I know that he's a strong man, and I'm sure that he will push Putin. And of course, I want to discuss with you some financial sanctions, which are very important to put on Russians, some additional sanctions, some very strong steps, what will really play a very important role. That will occur. The second point, we are thankful for the decision of G7 about 50 billion. That's not enough, so we are trying to do everything. Maybe you can help us, and the president help us to how to manage to get 300 billion and to move it to us, and we can use it for relation of Ukraine. And of course, we can buy a weapon, military aid. I've said that maybe these questions to you, but this is very important support. We are ready to buy, as I said to the president. And I had the opportunity to speak with him. We are ready to use it and to buy from American plants, factories, this weapon. We really need it. As I said, journalists, by the way, before our meeting, said this night was very loud. And it was really my condolences to families, following their relatives. It's a pity that also we used 10 missiles, like example, 10 missiles and 30 million dollars. So I mean, this is very expensive, and first of all, people, of course, lots of people, and of course, financing, and that's why we need these assets to use as best we can. And I'm ready, of course. So for us, crucial not to stop the military support, and I want to discuss it with you. And I'm happy that you're the first, by the way. Thank you, and you are the first minister from the new team, from the team of the President Trump, who came to us to Ukraine. Thank you so much, and I know that we can count on some other very important meetings this close days. And also, we are ready with this map after journalists will go. Yes, I want to discuss with you about this. Ukraine resource potential and opportunity for a strategic partnership with the US. We prepared it with all the details. I think this is very important, and I know that our teams began to speak and to work on some strategic document between our countries. And of course, I count that we will work on some detailed plan about partnership with strategic partners, Ukraine and America, and American business also, which investment to Ukraine resources very important. And I hope that in the closest time the document will be ready and we can sign it. Maybe during our meeting with the President Trump, I'll be very happy. But I think we have to work on all these things. You're very welcome. I was too long, sorry. Welcome. Please.
Good. Thank you, Mr. President. And this is my first official trip abroad, and it should be a strong signal that the war is a top priority for the Trump administration. The President Trump has been clear that he intends to do what it takes to end this war. He intends to speak with both parties, and the United States is committed to Ukrainian independence and is also committed that the American people will also understand what we're doing here. The President Trump has a plan to end this war, and we would like an economic cooperation agreement. And in exchange for this agreement, the U.S. will continue to provide material support for the Ukraine, for the people, and we believe that this agreement will be a strong signal to Russian leadership of the U.S. commitment that we have here. And we think it will be a strong signal to the American people that the money that is coming to Ukraine, we have shared values, we have shared security, and we look to increase our shared economic commitment.
Thank you, Press. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Estábamos viendo en este momento a Scott Bessent de visita oficial junto a Volodymyr Zelensky, el presidente ucraniano. Ahora seguimos con esa rueda de prensa conjunta, Estados Unidos, Ucrania, sobre todo hablando de la búsqueda de la paz. Pero antes una noticia de última hora, y es que JP Morgan está iniciando los despidos masivos tras esos beneficios récord que informaron en sus últimas cuentas. Los directivos de JP Morgan Chase han comenzado a notificar a sus empleados los recortes de puestos de trabajos. Ya desde la semana pasada dijeron personas familiarizadas que veríamos ya una parte de los despidos que el banco planea realizar a lo largo de este 2025. Al menos varios de estos despidos han sido en la oficina de Houston. JP Morgan planea también anunciar recortes adicionales en los meses de marzo, mayo, junio, agosto y septiembre. En febrero se despedirán al menos 1.000 empleados y no está claro cuántos planean recortar la empresa en todo el año. En diciembre, recordemos, la empresa tenía unos 317.000 empleados. El portavoz ha dicho que la empresa continúa contratando en muchas áreas, trabajando duro para reubicar a otros empleados afectados, que tiene alrededor de 14.000 vacantes, mientras que ha agregado unos 7.000 empleos en el último año. JP Morgan, recordemos, reportó unos beneficios récord de casi 60.000 millones de dólares en el 2024. Sus acciones cotizan cerca de su máximo histórico. Y volvemos ahora a conectar con Scott Bessent, de visita. Además, estaba explicando Bessent, primera visita oficial, y está ahora mismo con Zelensky en Kiev, en Ucrania. Vamos a escucharles.
Сьогодні це перший міністр з команди президента Трампа, і ми дуже вдячні за цей перший візит, і ми починаємо працювати більш детально з командою президента Трампа. Ми дякуємо, у нас була продуктивна, конструктивна розмова. Для мене дуже важливо питання гарантій безпеки для України, і ми говорили про корисні копалини. В цілому дякую секретарю за те, що у нього була можливість зустрітися з прем'єр-міністром України, з урядовцями нашої держави. Ми говорили про корисні копалини, і я думаю, тут більше деталей може сказати пане секретар, гість. Я знаю, що нашій команді придали перший драфт цього відповідного документа від Сполучених Штатів Америки про партнерство між нашими країнами. І я дуже хочу, щоб наша команда вивчила цей документ. Цей документ ми отримали сьогодні. Ми вивчимо цей документ і зробимо все, щоб наші команди могли дійсно дуже швидко домовитися і підписати цей документ. І ми дуже хочемо, тому що це наші головні партнери, Сполучені Штати Америки, це наші стратегічні партнери. Ми зробимо все, щоб вивчити всі деталі документа. Може, ми це зробимо все для того, щоб це встигнути на Мюнхенську конференцію, тому що не хочеться втрачати час. Саме це я пану секретарю і сказав, що я зі свого боку зроблю все, щоб наша команда урядовців зараз попрацювала ці найближчі 2 дні, і у нас була можливість зафіксувати якісь домовленості відповідні вже в Мюнхені. Побачимо.
Good. And President Zelensky, it's an honor to be here today. This is my first foreign trip as the 79th Secretary of the Treasury, and I wanted to come to Ukraine to meet the President, to see the people on the ground, and bring this important proposal from President Trump. President Trump is committed to ending what is the worst tragedy that I have seen in my adult life very quickly. And he is working with all sides. President Zelensky will be meeting with Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio in Munich. In the meantime, the government will review this document. We think the document is very important. The United States and Ukraine, we have shared values, we have shared security, and we would like to further intertwine our shared economics. And we believe that this is an important signal to the world to the Russian leadership that we stand together and by increasing our economic commitment through a partnership with the government and the people of Ukraine, that it will provide, once this conflict is over, it will provide a long-term security shield for all Ukrainians.
Дякую. Шановні колеги, будь ласка, є можливість для кількох запитань. Суспільне. Ось мікрофон, будь ласка.
Валерія Пашко, Суспільне. Перше запитання до обох. Напередодні президент Трамп повідомив, що Україна в принципі погодилася на угоду щодо корисних копалин, яка вартує $500 мільярдів. Я би хотіла дізнатися деталі цієї угоди. Йдеться про оплату за військову допомогу, яка вже надана, чи можливо уже яка буде надана, можливо, якісь інвестиції інші. Тобто саме президент Трамп говорив про плату за військову допомогу. І, пане президенте, можливо, про зустріч тет-а-тет із президентом Трампом можете кілька слів, чого очікуєте і чи найближчим часом, можливо, найближчий тиждень-два вже відбудеться? Дякую.
Дуже дякую за запитання. Передусім, я не знаю деталі цієї промови президента Трампа, але дуже важливо, що цей документ є, ця пропозиція про партнерські відносини. Для нас вони важливі. Для мене тут важливі деталі, що буде з тими корисними копалинами, які є на тимчасово окупованих територіях. Ми сьогодні про це ще не говорили. Я думаю, що це буде частиною бесіди майбутнього з президентом Трампом. Для мене це дуже важливо, як для президента, як для громадянина України. Вже ж це дійсно дуже важливо. Що стосується деталей, як я вам сказав, документ ми отримали сьогодні. Я знаю, що міністерство більш глибше сьогодні, ніж я. У мене була ставка, у мене був військовий кабінет. Я був сьогодні, тобто a little bit busy, так, з війною. І тому ми будемо вивчати зараз документ швидко, тому що, як я пообіцяв пану секретарю, для нас важливо, але для нас важливо зрозуміти деталі цього документу. Я впевнений, що ми про все домовимось, бо ми є стратегічними партнерами. Щодо майбутньої зустрічі, це про важливі речі, передусім гарантії безпеки для України. Гарантії безпеки я можу обговорювати виключно з президентом Трампом.
Yes. I believe that this document is important in terms of President Trump's vision for solving this conflict quickly. We believe that it provides the further guarantees for the Ukraine people of American assistance. Two, I believe that it provides the further guarantees for the Ukraine people of American assistance. Two, I believe that it provides a very strong signal to Russian leadership of the American commitment. Three, I believe that it signals to the American people that we are aligned in values, in security, and we will become more aligned in economic interest, and there will be value for the American people. Four, the more the investments that the U.S. has here in Ukraine, and I believe that once this conflict ends, that the Ukrainian economy could do very well, but the more the investments the U.S. has here, the more the security it will give the Ukrainian people. And five, I believe that the U.S., by focusing on the Ukrainian economy, can act as an accelerator for a post-conflict recovery.
Наступне запитання, будь ласка, Fox News.
Thank you, Mr. President. So what message do you think an economic deal with the United States would send to your people in Ukraine? What message would it send to Vladimir Putin? What also message would it send, or what concerns did you have over an economic deal with the U.S.? And Mr. Secretary, for you, this economic deal, could this economic deal be the foundation for a larger peace deal?
This is part of the foundation for a larger peace deal that President Trump has in mind. He looks forward to moving very quickly to try to resolve this conflict. As you've heard President Trump say before, he believes that the conflict would not have happened if he had been in office, but we are now, and the Ukrainian people are living through this horror, and he is committed to ending it as quickly as possible.
А економіка, безумовно, може бути частиною і повинна бути частиною гарантій безпеки для України. Це важливий сигнал, і приїзд секретаря, ще раз підкреслю, це перший ваш міжнародний візит і одразу в Україну. І ми за це вдячні пану секретарю і вдячні президенту Трампу. Це також сигнал, що і як, і які є пріоритети для Сполучених Штатів Америки. Україна в пріоритеті. Я за це вдячний президенту і його команді. А третє, це говорить про те, що дійсно президент Трамп хоче завершити війну швидко. Це швидкі кроки, достатньо швидко. Я безумовно розумію, що у нього є найголовніше це його внутрішні питання, а в міжнародному напрямку Україна один з пріоритетів. Це початок, в будь-якому випадку це початок. Це говорить про те, що у цього початку є продовження, можливе продовження про партнерство між нашими країнами. І я впевнений, що так все і станеться. Ну і це найголовніше, що цей сигнал – це ж конкретні пропозиції, це конкретний вже договір, пропозиції про партнерство. Економічне поки що це не тільки вся безпека загалом, але економічна безпека як частина гарантій безпеки. Я думаю, що це важливо.
Associated from AFP, sorry.
Sorry. Daria Andrievska, France Press. My first question for the Secretary. Do you think that United States would be willing to use force to help recapture mineral resources that already occupied by Russian Federation, if it means that they will get access to these mineral resources? І друге питання до пана президента. Чи була Україна проінформована про обмін між Америкою та Росією, оскільки пан президент Трамп сказав, що це можливі перші кроки до завершення війни? Дякую.
Yes, I would point out to the reporter that I am the Treasury Secretary. I am not the Defense Secretary, so I'm not able to make those judgments. I am here today to support President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people for economic security.
Дякую. Що стосується обміну, ви маєте на увазі полонених чи повернення громадянина Сполучених Штатів? Ні, я про це не знав. А перша частина у вас була про що?
Ні, все правильно про нього, тому що президент Трамп сказав, що якби це налагодження умовно контакту з Росією, яке допоможе закінченню війни. Що ви думаєте? Чи це так?
Подивимось.
Колеги, будь ласка, останнє запитання і, будь ласка, одне. Укрінформ.
Тетяна Пасова, Укрінформ. Пане президенте, сьогодні міністр оборони Сполучених Штатів заявив, що політика НАТО стосовно України нереалістична. Якщо НАТО зачинить перед Україною двері, які інші варіанти гарантій безпеки ми можемо розглядати? Угода чи, можливо, контингент? Що це має бути? Дякую.
Давайте ще раз і будемо з вами відвертими. Я не вважаю, що ці двері реально були відкриті. Я про це завжди казав. Ми дуже цього хотіли. І нам постійно говорили про політику відкритих дверей. Так, про це всі говорили. А про те, що в реаліях, що вони відкриті до нас, я, чесно кажучи, без Сполучених Штатів Америки, ви знаєте, що політика Сполучених Штатів Америки, бувши адміністрації всіх цих років і сьогоднішньої адміністрації щодо НАТО нам відомо. Нас поки що ніхто не запрошує в НАТО. Я постійно про це говорю.
Estamos en este momento viendo a Volodymyr Zelensky, le estaban preguntando justamente por la potencial entrada de Ucrania en la OTAN. Vamos a escucharle.
Я вважаю, що все це помилкові речі, абсолютно. Починаючи з Будапештського меморандуму. Обмін ні на що, на папір. Внесення в Конституцію України беззворотній шлях до НАТО. Так, ми всі хочемо в НАТО, ми всі з вами адекватні люди, але ви повинні зрозуміти, що всі ці розмови про кроки, про реформи, про тощо, переобладнання армії, про новий рівень української армії, ну і куди вже вище. Ми зупинили Путіна. Тобто зараз ви це розумієте, або популізм когось, або балачки. і зміни нашого українського законодавства заради популізму. Ми хочемо в НАТО. І це факт. Для нас це дійсно гарантія безпеки. Але Сполучені Штати, Німеччина, Угорщина нас там не бачать поки що. І тоді, коли ми говоримо про альтернативу, і я завжди говорю, що найдешевший варіант для всіх – це Україна в НАТО. Найдорожчий – це будувати НАТО в Україні, бо іншого шляху у нас з вами, у українців, не буде. І іншого шляху для безпеки Європи не буде. І потім це буде відображатись і на чесній безпеці Сполучених Штатів, але це потім. Але що дуже важливо, Путін не хоче закінчити війну. Будувати НАТО в Україні – це армія така, як в Росії. Просто десь 1,5 мільйона. Тобто 220 бригад, які є в Росії, а у нас 110 бойових бригад. Ось і все. Ось така звичайна арифметика. А в Європі, я про це нещодавно говорив, приблизно 80 живих, може 82 бойові бригади. Ось і все. Росія, якщо завтра не буде України, піде на Європу і окупує її. І нам потрібні реальні гарантії безпеки. І я прошу у президента Трампа дати нам ці гарантії безпеки, допомогти Україні, посилити нас. Безумовно, ми повинні говорити з Європою, тому що мати армію ще більшу, у нас зараз дефіцит бюджету, але мати армію ще більше, хоча б мінімум таку, як зараз, і годувати цю армію, і озброювати – це мати великий ресурс. Ці гроші звідкись треба брати. Ось приблизно такі гарантії безпеки.
Дякую, колего. Дякую, пане президенте.
Дякую,
пане секретар. Прес-конференцію завершено.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Estamos siguiendo esa rueda de prensa conjunta. Scott Bessent, el ya nuevo secretario del Tesoro estadounidense, y el presidente ucraniano Volodymyr Zelensky. Vamos en los próximos minutos a acercarnos a hablar del oro, que sigue acercándose a sus máximos históricos. También vamos a llevar una noticia en clave de sostenibilidad de la mano de Nordea, ahora en unos minutos. Pero, como decíamos antes, vamos a echar un vistazo al precio del oro. También, bueno, pues hablar de que se vuelve a acercar de nuevo a máximos históricos, sobre todo a esos, rozando ya esos $3.000 la onza. Francisco Javier López Milán, CEO de Silver and Gold Patrimonio. Muy buenas tardes.
Muy buenas tardes.
Bueno, no dejamos de ver subidas, revalorizaciones en el precio del metal dorado. Ya lo veníais diciendo, además, siempre en vuestras intervenciones aquí, que esperabais llegar a esos 3.000 en breves. Pero, ¿qué factores creéis ahora mismo desde Silver and Gold? ¿Qué factores están ahora mismo detrás de las recientes revalorizaciones del oro?
Pues fundamentalmente miedo, duda y expectativa. Miedo al considerar el oro como valor refugio ante cualquier tipo de panorama que estamos viendo a nivel global. Duda acerca de los efectos que puedan generar la política de Trump, ¿vale? Con todos sus aranceles y todo lo que está haciendo. Y luego expectativas respecto a la potencial revalorización en función de la demanda, compras por parte de los bancos centrales, y realmente pues creo que el conjunto es lo que está haciendo que el oro y también el resto de metales pues esté acelerando esa subida que estaba más o menos prevista para el primer semestre.
Es interesante siempre mirar el histórico del oro, tengo aquí delante, porque se pueden ver algunos acontecimientos geopolíticos históricos, ¿no? Pues yo no sé, viene a ser una revalorización, por ejemplo, en el 79 con esa crisis del petróleo en Irán, que luego fue para todo el mundo. Luego se puede ver la crisis perfectamente de 2008. Te quiero preguntar, ¿la lógica ha cambiado o de verdad ahora hay tanto miedo como en esos momentos? Estamos hablando de un momento, por ejemplo, en el 79, que es que faltaba petróleo en todo el mundo porque hubo un shock de oferta, crisis de 2008, pues nada que decir. Entonces, ¿qué hay? O sea, ahora mismo puede haber miedo, decías, miedo, duda y expectativa, pero ¿ha cambiado un poco la lógica?
Creo que se ha acentuado bastante más el aspecto de ir buscando, digamos, ganancias más o menos estables, independientemente porque estamos viendo que efectivamente la situación no ha cambiado mucho desde hace un año, 2 años para acá, salvo que, bueno, que ha vuelto otra vez a ganar Trump en Estados Unidos. Seguimos con la guerra de Ucrania, seguimos con todas las guerras que están en la zona de África, seguimos con las dudas acerca del mercado financiero y seguimos con el aumento de demanda y compra por parte de los bancos centrales. ¿Qué se está acentuando? Pues sinceramente yo creo que la gente está ya un poco, o sea, los inversores y los compradores están un poco vacunados con respecto al tema sobre todo de la dificultad de geopolítica, y lo que están buscando realmente es tranquilidad, seguridad, valor refugio y expectativas de ganancia en el medio y largo plazo.
Decías antes también la importancia de esos aranceles de Trump. ¿Crees que afectarán directamente al precio del oro?
En teoría tenía que haberle afectado negativamente, puesto que obviamente la idea era potenciar y reforzar, pues, digamos, la economía americana con el desarrollo, con el aumento, digamos, dando más rendimiento a los bonos, por ejemplo. Pero estamos viendo de que no, estamos viendo de que, bueno, pues parece que como decimos, que se ha pegado un tiro en el pie en muchas cosas. Y resulta de que estamos viendo máximos de nuevo, el pasado por la madrugada llegamos a los 2.942, con posibilidad y con ganas de seguir subiendo. Sinceramente, no creo que haya un efecto. Puede haber que haya correcciones y obviamente lo vamos a ver, correcciones que serán oportunidades de compra, pero sinceramente no creo que haya un efecto muy acentuado el hecho de estos aranceles con respecto al tema del oro en principio, y a lo mejor un poco en los metales industriales, pero estamos viendo que tampoco.
También trabajáis en Silver and Gold con otros metales. Sí que hemos conocido, pues, por ejemplo, el lunes esos aranceles a varios metales, al acero, al aluminio. ¿Eso sí que cómo van a afectar al mercado de las materias primas?
Pues sí puede afectar en todo aquello que tenga que ver con la industria, el uso de ciertos metales, por ejemplo, ya no vamos al paladio, no vamos al rodio, no vamos a otros metales un poquito más raros, en los cuales pues sí obviamente aumentan los costes. Puede ser que la demanda se enfríe y busquen alternativas en otros metales, pero que más o menos si la tecnología va orientada en un tipo de catalizador, por ejemplo, orientado al paladio, volverán otra vez al platino, con lo cual indirectamente harán que vuelva a subir otra vez el precio del platino, o incluso el rodio, o incluso el osmio, por ejemplo. A nivel industrial sí puede haber que haya algún tipo de movimiento, pero creo que fomentará todos aquellos metales que sigan siendo baratos, como por ejemplo la plata, en los cuales no olvidemos que la plata está en muchísimos procesos industriales.
Exactamente, la última pregunta iba a ir por ese sentido, también usos industriales. ¿Qué esperáis en Silver and Gold del precio de la plata ahora a corto plazo?
Pues va a haber movimiento de mucha volatilidad, pero va encaminado hacia los 40, 42, incluso te diría $45 la onza antes de finalizar el año. Y con respecto, por ejemplo, este año creo que puede haber alguna sorpresa por metales que han estado un poco ahí de capa caída, como el paladio.
Pues vamos a estar muy pendientes, como siempre, del mercado de las materias primas, y más con vosotros, Francisco Javier López Milán, CEO de Silver and Gold Patrimonio. Muchísimas gracias, como siempre, por estar hoy con nosotros.
Gracias a vosotros.
Ahora vamos a conectar con Powell, con la Fed. Antes, noticia en clave de sostenibilidad de la mano de Nordea.
Nordea Asset Management le ofrece la noticia ESG del día.
Fundae lanza cursos gratuitos para formar a las pymes en sostenibilidad. ¿Está preparada su pyme para realizar el informe de sostenibilidad que pronto estará obligada a hacer? ¿Sabría cómo gestionar sus recursos y sus residuos? ¿Ha iniciado usted o su empresa su transición energética? ¿Sabría cómo conseguir subvenciones y ayudas para sus proyectos sostenibles? La Fundación Estatal para la Formación en Sostenibles, Fundae, ante el gran reto de la sostenibilidad, ha puesto en marcha un plan de sensibilización y formación de las pymes ante la necesidad de adaptarse a un modelo de producción y consumo más eficiente.
Nordea Asset Management le ha ofrecido la noticia ESG del día.
5:54 de la tarde. Vamos a conectar en este momento de nuevo con Jerome Powell. Antes echamos un vistazo rapidísimo a los índices europeos que han cerrado en positivo. DAX-Etra arriba medio punto porcentual, CAC 40 arriba un 0,2, el Eurostoxx también un 0,3%, lo mismo que el FTSE británico, y el selectivo español, el IBEX 35, ha sido el que más ha ganado proporcionalmente en la jornada, 1,12% de revalorización, ojo, acercándose ya a los 13.000, 12.909 puntos. Y como os decíamos, conectamos ya con Jerome Powell, presidente de la Reserva Federal de Estados Unidos.
Venice. And so it's Sai. And that's why it's called the Bridge of Sighs, the Ponte del Suspiri. The reason I bring that up is I think a lot of Americans feel that way right now, that they're crossing this bridge and maybe it's the last time they've seen the beautiful America that we've had. And they're worried. They're worried about the usurpation of powers. They're worried about the balance of powers. Now, I was very proud of you when you stood up and said, I can't be fired. The president can't fire me. I'm staying. Can anyone up here fire you?
Anyone up there? No single person can.
No single person can, right? I hope you continue with that independence, because I think at this moment it's very important. Someone mentioned it earlier, and I think it is very, very important. So with that out of the way, I did want to talk about the dual mandate, especially the employment issue. For a lot of people in America, their job really is the most important thing for them. Not even their investment, their job. And that's why employment is such an important position, I think, and so important to be part of the dual mandate. Are you looking at changing in any way the dual mandate?
So we don't have that authority. That's
Who has the authority to do that?
Congress.
Only Congress?
Yes. Well, Congress would have to pass a bill, which would be signed by the president.
Say that again, sorry?
Congress would need to pass a bill to change the dual mandate that the president signs.
That's right. And so I hope that you maintain your independence, at the same time follow the law, that there's a dual mandate. And that's, I think, very, very important to most Americans. And with that, again, I thank you for your service. I thank Michael Barr for service. I know he's going to continue to serve. I know he'll serve honorably like he always has. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We recognize the gentleman from Middle Tennessee, Mr. Rose, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hill and Ranking Member Waters, for holding the hearing today. And thank you, Chair Powell. Always good to see you here with us. Chair Powell, you may recall the last time we spoke, I brought up the issue of credit risk transfers, CRTs, and urged you to allocate more resources to ensure that that framework applicants were receiving decisions from the Federal Reserve. I've recently heard back from stakeholders that they are receiving decisions from the Federal Reserve regarding CRT applications. I hope that the Federal Reserve team continues to be focused on cutting down the backlog so that financial institutions can take risk off their balance sheets. Thank you for that. However, I still have concerns that we are not fully optimizing the use of CRTs. In the case of mortgage risk, CRTs have successfully shifted risk from taxpayers to private capital, including capital markets and global reinsurers, while government
Silver Gold Patrimonio nace en 2018 con el objetivo de innovar en el mercado de los metales preciosos de inversión, ofreciendo nuevas alternativas para que cualquier persona, familia o empresa pueda entrar en el fantástico mundo de los metales de inversión de forma sencilla y acompañada por consultores expertos en el sector. Silver Gold Patrimonio quiere avanzar contigo.
¿Las soluciones de inversión tradicionales ya no cumplen con sus objetivos financieros? ¿La escasa rentabilidad y la volatilidad de los mercados le empujan a mantener los ahorros en su cuenta corriente? Si la respuesta a ambas preguntas es afirmativa, lo más probable es que esté pensando que la opción de no invertir es la óptima. Esta alternativa es quizás la más inmediata, pero ciertamente no parece la más rentable. Nuestros productos de generación de rentas están diseñados para ofrecerle el equilibrio adecuado entre seguridad y rentabilidad, con el fin de aprovechar todas las oportunidades del mercado. Hemos revisado nuestro enfoque tradicional, ampliando el espectro de oportunidades dentro del segmento de rentas para una inversión que le prepare mejor para el futuro. Y con la integración de los principios ESG, podemos ayudar a construir un futuro más verde para todos los inversores que buscan rentabilidad. No se conforme con la liquidez. Prepárese para el futuro con fondos de Invesco. Descubra más en invesco.es/income.
Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos de nuevo a Negocios Televisión, bienvenidos al espacio de las noticias del día, mirando a la última hora, pendientes de la actualidad, con el mundo mirando a esta foto, a esta imagen. Donald Trump, el presidente de Estados Unidos, junto al preso liberado en las últimas horas, Mark Fogel. Les contábamos esta mañana, esto puede ser el inicio de la negociación, esto puede ser el inicio de la conversación entre Rusia y Estados Unidos. Precisamente en este sentido está hablando ahora mismo el presidente de Estados Unidos. Donald Trump acaba de publicar un post en su red social, en True Social, y confirma nuestras informaciones. Dice que ha mantenido una conversación con el líder ruso, con Vladimir Putin. Dice literalmente, he hablado con Putin sobre Ucrania, Oriente Medio, energía, inteligencia artificial y el dólar. Dice que ha tenido una llamada muy larga y productiva con el presidente ruso. Dice, hemos coincidido en que queremos detener las muertes en esta guerra entre Rusia y Ucrania. Ojo con esto, dice que tanto Putin como él han acordado visitar los países de cada uno. Hay una fecha clave, el próximo 9 de mayo, el día de la victoria, el día de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Ojo, porque Donald Trump podría estar allí. Dice que va a llamar a Zelensky también en las próximas horas y además dice que Putin y el presidente de Estados Unidos han acordado que sus respectivos equipos van a iniciar negociaciones de inmediato. Negociaciones entre Rusia y Estados Unidos de inmediato. Noticia de alcance. Donald Trump, el presidente de Estados Unidos, habla precisamente sobre la conversación con el líder ruso. Dice que esto va a conducir a una conclusión exitosa. La semana de la conferencia de seguridad de Múnich, la geopolítica, mirando precisamente a este hombre, mirando al presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, que ya habla con el líder ruso. Ojo, porque hay reacción también desde Rusia, desde el Kremlin. La agencia TASS dice que Putin ha invitado a Trump a Moscú. Putin y Trump han acordado reunirse. Es la noticia de última hora. El propio presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, acaba de anunciar esta noticia, de confirmar esta noticia de alcance, esta llamada telefónica con el presidente ruso en True Social. Está lanzando estos mensajes diciendo literalmente que ha hablado con Vladimir Putin. Han acordado reunirse, han acordado iniciar las negociaciones y además también han acordado visitas, tanto la de Putin a Washington como la del presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, a Moscú. Es la noticia. En estos momentos se inician las conversaciones, las negociaciones sobre Ucrania. Trump acaba de hablar con Putin. Pendientes precisamente del presidente de Estados Unidos, miramos también en este caso a informaciones sobre México y sobre Canadá. Seguimos pendientes de estas amenazas del presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, que habla de los aranceles, los famosos aranceles. Ojo, en el caso de México y de Canadá podrían alcanzar el 50%. Entrarían en vigor
en un mes, justo el próximo 12 de marzo. Los aranceles del 25% al acero y el aluminio anunciados este lunes por Donald Trump se van a sumar a los del 25% sobre bienes mexicanos y canadienses, ya impuestos, pero en suspenso durante un mes. Y las tarifas impuestas a Canadá y a México para incitarlos a controlar la migración ilegal y el tráfico de fentanilo entrarán en vigor el 1 de marzo. El acero y el aluminio producidos por ambos países serán gravados en total con un 50% a partir del día 12 de ese mes. Es lo que apunta la Casa Blanca. El presidente de Estados Unidos firmó este lunes un decreto que impone aranceles del 25% al acero y al aluminio importados a Estados Unidos a partir del próximo 12 de marzo, sin excepción ni exención. Esto se aplica a todos los países, es lo que declaraba el propio Donald Trump en el despacho Oval. Amenaza a México y a Canadá, habla de un 50% en los aranceles tanto al acero como al aluminio. Mirando las amenazas a México y a Canadá, como empezábamos este espacio, esta es la noticia del día, esta es la imagen. Están viendo precisamente el mensaje del presidente de Estados Unidos. Donald Trump confirma una larga y muy productiva conversación telefónica con Vladimir Putin. Dice, hablamos de Ucrania, Oriente Medio, energía, inteligencia artificial, el poder del dólar y otros temas. Dice que ambos han reflexionado sobre la historia de sus naciones y el hecho de que lucharon juntos con éxito en la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Recordaron que Rusia perdió decenas de millones de personas y Estados Unidos también perdió a muchas otras. Dice que han hablado del beneficio que algún día obtendrán al trabajar juntos, pero dice, primero, como ambos acordamos, queremos detener las millones de muertes que se están produciendo en la guerra con Rusia y Ucrania. Dice precisamente que el presidente ruso, Vladimir Putin, ha hablado de utilizar el sentido común. Dice, anuncia el presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, que ambos han acordado trabajar juntos muy de cerca, incluso, esto es importante, visitando las naciones de cada uno. Putin ha invitado a Donald Trump a Moscú. Dice además que han acordado que sus equipos van a iniciar negociaciones de inmediato. Trump anuncia el inicio de las negociaciones con Rusia. Dice que van a comenzar llamando al presidente de Ucrania, Volodymyr Zelensky, para informarle de la conversación, algo que va a hacer ahora mismo, va a llamar ahora mismo a Volodymyr Zelensky. Dice que millones de personas han muerto en una guerra que no habría sucedido y no se deben perder más vidas. Es la noticia de alcance en estos momentos. Termina diciendo Donald Trump, creo que este esfuerzo conducirá a una conclusión exitosa. Espero que pronto. Este es el mensaje de Donald Trump, el mensaje que mueve el tablero geopolítico en estos momentos. Primera llamada telefónica con el presidente ruso, con Vladimir Putin. Quiere terminar la guerra Donald Trump en esta semana, marcada por la conferencia de seguridad de Múnich, que van a poder seguir en la señal de negocios televisión. Se inician las negociaciones entre Rusia y Ucrania. Acaba de confirmarlo Donald Trump. Horas señalaba precisamente en este sentido que ha habido muchos muertos y que quiere terminar la guerra en Ucrania. Agradecía a Vladimir Putin la liberación de Mark Fogel. Escuchamos a Trump.
I've met many. In terms of the war, you know, 1.5 million soldiers, young people have been killed. I've met many of them. Yeah, and it's a terrible thing going on. So we want to get that done. I think this could be the very important element. You could be a big part of it, actually, because it could be a big, important part of getting the war over with Ukraine. And we appreciate.
El propio Trump agradecía a Putin la liberación de Fogel. Anunciaba que hoy habrá otra liberación. Ya tiene nombre, Alexander Vinik, un magnate ruso que ha sido liberado. Escuchamos lo que decía Donald Trump.
In terms of this deal, Mr. President?
Very fair, very, very fair, very reasonable. Not like deals you've seen over the years. They were very fair. And I think that's going to lead, and somebody else is being released tomorrow that you will know of. But we wanted to get this done, very important. And Steve wanted to actually fly over and get Mark and get him home.
Precisamente les contamos que Estados Unidos va a liberar al ruso Alexander Vinik, presunto capo del cibercrimen, como parte de un intercambio con Rusia que liberó a Mark Fogel. Es lo que informaba este miércoles el New York Times. Vinik operaba BTC-E, una de las plataformas de intercambio de criptomonedas más grande del mundo. Fue arrestado en 2017 y detenido a pedido de Washington bajo sospecha de lavar 4.000 millones de dólares a través de la plataforma. En mayo se declaró culpable de conspiración para cometer lavado de dinero. Se enfrentó a 20 años de prisión. Miramos también el hecho de que las autoridades rusas hayan liberado al ciudadano de Estados Unidos, Mark Fogel, que podría ser una señal de la futura relación entre el presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, y su homólogo ruso, Vladimir Putin. Es lo que comentaba este miércoles el enviado especial de la Casa Blanca para Oriente Medio, Steve Witkoff. En declaraciones a periodistas dijo que la interacción entre los líderes de Estados Unidos y Rusia puede tener un papel fundamental en la política mundial. Decía, creo que eso es quizá una señal sobre cómo serán en el futuro las relaciones de trabajo entre el presidente Trump y el presidente Putin. Es lo que opinaba Witkoff, añadiendo que esas interacciones pueden tener un gran impacto tanto en el conflicto ucraniano como en la política mundial. Decía, tenían una gran amistad y creo que ahora va a continuar. Es algo realmente bueno para el mundo. No obstante, cuando se le preguntó cuántas veces Trump habría hablado con Vladimir Putin, comentó que no podía responder porque desconocía la respuesta. La respuesta, se lo contábamos al principio de este informativo, ya la tenemos. Trump y Putin han hablado hace apenas unos minutos. Se inician las negociaciones en Ucrania. Precisamente en este sentido hablaba el secretario de Defensa de Estados Unidos. Asestaba un duro golpe a Ucrania. Decía, debemos reconocer lo primero que volver a las fronteras de 2014 no es realista. Dice además que la adhesión de Ucrania a la OTAN tampoco es realista. Duro golpe para Zelensky. Escuchamos al secretario de Defensa de Estados Unidos.
But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European.
Durante la reunión en formato Ramstein celebrada este miércoles en Bruselas, el secretario de Defensa de Estados Unidos ha declarado que hay que empezar a reconocer que volver a las fronteras de Ucrania anteriores a 2014 es un objetivo poco realista. Decía que perseguir esta meta ilusoria solo prolongará la guerra y causará más sufrimiento, es lo que afirma el jefe del Pentágono, señalando que una paz duradera para Ucrania debe incluir garantías de seguridad para que no vuelva a estallar la guerra. Asimismo, Gesef indicó que el gobierno de Estados Unidos no cree que la adhesión de Ucrania a la OTAN sea un desenlace realista de una solución negociada del conflicto. En cambio, las garantías de seguridad para Kiev deben estar respaldadas por tropas competentes europeas y no europeas. Dice que estarían cubiertas por la letra del artículo 5 de la OTAN, que estipula que un ataque contra un aliado de la alianza se considera un ataque contra todos. Hablamos ahora del presidente de Ucrania, Volodymyr Zelensky. Ha anunciado que Estados Unidos ha presentado hoy a Ucrania un primer borrador de un acuerdo sobre recursos naturales. Dice que está estudiando ahora el borrador de este acuerdo. En la reunión con Scott Bessent, con el secretario de Estado de Estados Unidos, anunciaba que espera llegar a un acuerdo definitivo en la conferencia de Múnich. Zelensky esperando la llamada del presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, que anunciaba hace escasos minutos que ya ha hablado con Putin. El próximo es Zelensky. Un Zelensky que además también reconocía que la adhesión de Ucrania a la OTAN es poco probable debido a las posiciones de Hungría, Alemania y Estados Unidos. Expresaba esta opinión en una entrevista con la revista británica The Economist. La publicación cita las palabras de Zelensky en estilo indirecto. Al mismo tiempo le cita diciendo que si a Ucrania se le niega la adhesión a la alianza, deberá construir su propia OTAN, lo que según Zelensky significa un mayor aumento del número de las Fuerzas Armadas. También dijo que aún no ha recibido propuestas específicas del acuerdo del equipo del presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, pero espera escucharla en las próximas reuniones. El Comité de Investigación de Rusia, les contamos además que ha abierto un caso penal contra el periodista español Alberto Rojas del diario El Mundo por cruzar ilegalmente la frontera nacional en la provincia de Kursk junto con militares ucranianos. De momento, las fuerzas del orden rusas intentan dar con su paradero para detenerlo. Dice el comunicado que la investigación ha establecido que en febrero de 2025 Roja, sin documentos que le dieran derecho a entrar en territorio de la Federación Rusa, cruzó ilegalmente junto con militares de las fuerzas ucranianas la frontera estatal y posteriormente permaneció en el distrito de Sucha, en la provincia de Kursk, es lo que anuncia este miércoles el organismo en un comunicado. También miramos al gasto militar de Rusia, cuya economía ha puesto en pie de guerra el presidente. Vladimir Putin supera ya todos los presupuestos de defensa de Europa juntos, es lo que apunta un estudio. El gasto total de defensa de Rusia se disparó el año pasado un 42% en términos reales, hasta 13,1 billones de rublos, lo que equivale a 462.000 millones de dólares, sobre la base de la paridad del poder adquisitivo, que se ajusta a lo que las monedas puedan comprar en sus países de origen. En comparación, los presupuestos de defensa europeos, incluidos el de Reino Unido y los Estados miembros de la Unión Europea, aumentaron casi un 12% el año pasado, hasta 457.000 millones de dólares, ligeramente menos que el gasto de Moscú, es lo que apunta este miércoles el grupo de expertos Instituto Internacional de Estudios Estratégicos. El balance militar es una evaluación anual de las capacidades militares globales y del gasto en defensa. Deja al descubierto algunos de los desafíos de seguridad que enfrenta Europa si Estados Unidos recorta su apoyo a Ucrania y a la defensa europea. También les contamos que un superpetrolero que transporta el crudo insignia de Rusia, el Urals, ha llegado a la costa de Cuba, mientras Moscú busca nuevos compradores en medio del endurecimiento de las sanciones y las interrupciones en el Mar Rojo. El ligero se encuentra ahora cerca de la bahía, según mostraban datos de seguimientos de buques compilados por Bloomberg y por LSEG. El mes pasado recolectó al menos 1,7 millones de barriles de Urals mediante transferencias de barco a barco en la costa sur de Grecia antes de navegar hacia Cuba. Rusia envía crudo de los Urales a Cuba en un buque bajo sanciones de Estados Unidos. Seguimos mirando al Kremlin, que rechazaba este miércoles un posible canje de los distritos fronterizos ocupados por Ucrania en la región de Kursk por territorios bajo control del ejército ruso en Ucrania. Preguntaban por esto a Dmitry Peskov, el portavoz ruso. Decía, esto es imposible. Rusia nunca abordó ni abordará el asunto del intercambio de nuestro territorio. Es lo que apuntaba en su rueda de prensa telefónica diaria. Peskov subrayó que, por supuesto, las unidades ucranianas serán expulsadas de este territorio. Todos aquellos, decía, que no se han expulsado serán liquidados. El portavoz se refería a las declaraciones de Zelensky sobre un intercambio directo de territorios en el marco de unas futuras negociaciones de paz con Rusia. El presidente ruso Vladimir Putin, que ha mantenido este miércoles una conversación telefónica con el nuevo líder de Siria, Ahmed al-Shara, es lo que informan desde el Kremlin. Según precisaron, durante la llamada, el mandatario ruso ha deseado al presidente interino del país árabe éxitos en la resolución de las tareas que afronta el nuevo gobierno. De igual modo, la parte rusa ha subrayado su posición en apoyo a la unidad, la soberanía y la integridad territorial del Estado sirio, así como también destacó la importancia de implementar medidas para una normalización sostenible en el país basada en el diálogo y con la participación de las principales fuerzas políticas y grupos etnoconfesionales de la población. En este contexto, el presidente ruso ha reiterado la inquebrantable disposición de su país para contribuir a mejorar la situación socioeconómica en Siria, incluida la asistencia humanitaria para los residentes. Han abordado cuestiones relacionadas con la cooperación en los ámbitos comercial, económico y educativo. El presidente ucraniano Volodymyr Zelensky también escribía este miércoles en sus redes sociales tras un nuevo ataque con misiles y drones ruso que ha tenido entre sus objetivos la capital. Aquí decía Zelensky que Vladimir Putin no se prepara para la paz y continúa matando ucranianos y destruyendo ciudades. Este nuevo ataque ruso tiene lugar antes de la visita a Ucrania de la primera delegación de la nueva administración republicana, que según adelantó recientemente Zelensky, debe producirse esta misma semana y tiene como objetivo impulsar el proceso de paz que ha prometido Donald Trump para poner fin a la guerra. Decía Zelensky que solo medidas contundentes y presión sobre Rusia pueden parar este terror. Apelaba una vez más a la unidad y el apoyo de todos los socios de Ucrania para conseguir un final justo de la guerra. Zelensky, que decía que está preparado para conversaciones con Estados Unidos, dice que las negociaciones van a comenzar pronto en muchos niveles. Hablaba de una reunión del Consejo de Seguridad Nacional a la espera, precisamente, de que le llame el presidente de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump. Zelensky está preparado. Escuchamos.
Зустрічі з представниками Сполучених Штатів і найближчим часом перемовини на багатьох рівнях. І на завтра я призначив засідання РНБО. Кілька питань. Будемо робити дешевше ліки в українських аптеках. Це важливо. І продовжимо захищати